In my introductory video about Taoism, I talked about how the religion has taken on many different forms throughout history, and that there's no use in calling it a coherent religion in the regular sense. Everything from a politically involved and strongly ritualistic practice to the total escape from society and free-flowing ascetic attitudes, it all fits under the wider umbrella of Taoism and the ways that it has been approached. One example of the later kind we find in an early example of Taoist practice and religion with a group of scholars who have come to have a legendary status in the Chinese cultural consciousness and who are collectively known as the Seven Sages of the Bamboo Grove. The 3rd century was not a very pleasant time for China. It saw the collapse of the long-standing Han dynasty in 220 and the subsequent descent into political chaos. For most of the century, rivaling kingdoms and power structures fought and warred amongst each other in what has become known as the infamous Three Kingdoms period, immortalized in different books, movies, and video games. And in this period of great unrest, the political and social world was filled with violence, with corruption and jealousy, as if that isn't the case otherwise. But while this may paint a very bleak picture, such times of unrest can also sometimes lead to flourishing or very interesting developments in other areas of society. And in a way, such was the case here, for as a result of this environment, we get a very fascinating and incredibly chilled out group of scholars who would, as I said, come to have a legendary status to this day. You see, there were a group of 7 scholars, poets, and musicians who all were of pretty high status and prominence in Wei Dynasty China. But they became so disillusioned with the political corruption of politics and the government that they would escape to the countryside and to a specific bamboo grove surrounded by beautiful nature. Here, they would gather together to appreciate the beauty of nature and to compose poetry, play music together, and drink wine. Some stories even claim that they may have consumed some psychedelic substances. Now, all of this was a way to escape the chaotic and dangerous world in the so-called civilized society. They could all be seen as Taoists, as this retreat was quintessentially a kind of Taoist practice. One of the more organized forms of Taoism that had emerged at this time was a movement known as Jingtan, or pure conversation. It was characterized by an advocating of free living, individual expression, and a, quote, hedonistic escape from the corrupt court politics of the short-lived Wei dynasty. And the 7 sages of the Bamboo Grove can very much be said to belong to this school, known as Jingtan, or pure conversation. If you remember the main principles of Taoism, it talks about Wu Wei, or effortless action, to live freely, spontaneously, and in harmony with nature and the Tao. The 7 sages very much represent this, a rejection of a kind of Confucian legalism by escaping into nature and appreciating it, as well as flowing or being one with the Tao through composing poetry, music, and having pure conversations, free discussions among friends about metaphysical and other philosophical questions. I would totally like to hang out with these people. These 7 sages of the Bamboo Grove included Ji Kang, a writer, poet, musician, and alchemist whose estate the Bamboo Grove was located next to. He was apparently an accomplished player of the guqin, back then known only as qin, which is a Chinese string instrument that has a strong connection with Taoism in particular. There was also Lui Jing, a Taoist poet and apparently a great lover of alcohol. There was Ruan Qian, another musician and player of the ancient Chinese lute, and the modern development of that instrument, the Ruan, is actually named after him. There was Chan Zhou, a great Taoist scholar who wrote famous commentaries on the Zhuangzi, one of the foundational texts of Taoism. Wang Rong, an official and scholar of the Jin dynasty. There was Chan Tao, which was another musician and, as his name suggests, a prominent Taoist. And lastly, the sage that is probably the most renowned of the seven, Ruan Ji, who was a master musician and poet who also played the instrument guqin. He used to write poetry that strongly criticized and spoke out against the ruling class, but did so through allegory so as to hide it from those he actually criticized. He is also said to have purposefully remained drunk for 60 days just to avoid being forced into an arranged political marriage. Also, he seems to have had a significant impact on music and wrote many compositions. One of the melodies that is attributed to him, known as Drunken Ecstasy or Drunken Madness, still survives and can be heard on many guqin recordings. These sages all had the common wish to escape from the world and instead live in simplicity. In the bamboo grove, they could express their Taoist ideals and love of nature through their music and poetry. Some stories, for example, tell how they would enter ecstatic states, jump into the water to cool off, and then start writing inspired verses of poetry. The story of the seven sages of the bamboo grove is a legendary one. It is, of course, incredibly romantic and inspiring in a way. I think many of us can relate to the sages and their wish to escape a chaotic society. The question of the authenticity of this story is undecided. The seven sages themselves were indeed real people who lived at this time, but some argue that the story of their regular gathering in this bamboo grove may be just that, a story. But irregardless of its historical authenticity, the seven sages have come to play a legendary role in the collective consciousness of the Chinese people and to some degree outside China as well. They represent a wish for a simpler life, one free from the complex world of politics and societal upheaval, a life that is free, expressive, in the company of good companions, and in tune and appreciation of the beauty of nature and our connection to it. The seven sages are thus also a perfect expression of some of the most central ideas in the religion of Taoism. I think we can all recognize ourselves in the sages. In these current times of pandemics, wars, political instability, and polarization, the idea of just escaping it all to enjoy some nice music, poetry, and nature together with your friends is kind of unnervingly tempting. So if I suddenly stop publishing videos for a while, you know where to find me. I'll see you next time.